So, good evening and welcome to this last session. My name is Lucia Cardosi. I come from Trieste University, Italy. This last session is actually intended to be a master class aiming at improving our knowledge on how to build a bioeconomy, more specifically, how to measure progress in bioeconomy. And this issue actually matches very well with the concept we heard this morning and in the previous session. I must say that I was very much impressed by the words of Commissioner Gauguin Quinn, who underlined how Horizon 2020 is a loan, not a gift, so that we must be able to tell what has been done and achieved. That means, in other words, that we must be prepared to assess the outcome of our work and efforts. But for that purpose, we need clear definitions, indicators, databases. On that respect, today we have the privilege to have with us two prominent experts in the field of bioeconomy analysis and monitoring, who will give two complementary presentations. Firstly, Dr. Pierre-Alain Schieb will illustrate the global scenario by discussing bioeconomy from the OECD perspective. And afterwards, Dr. Damien Plan will talk more in detail about the Bioeconomy Observatory of the European Commission, its objective methodology, and also challenges it's facing. So I'm introducing immediately Dr. Schieb, who is currently Professor of Industrial Bioeconomy at Neoma Business School in Reims and President of Beck Casting Company. Previously, Dr. Schieb had been head of OECD future projects and more specifically of the project on the bioeconomy in 2030, a policy agenda that represents probably so far the most comprehensive analysis of bioeconomy. Therefore, Dr. Schieb, I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Professor Cardosi. Good afternoon, everyone. I see that for a masterclass, we have a business as usual students. You know, they are all trying to be away from the professors. So, very nice to be here with you. Thanks for inviting me. And just a few words about this notion of having this new concept of a chair on industrial bioeconomy. This is probably one of the first in Europe or elsewhere. And interestingly enough, the only comment I will make is that we have now 3 chairs in Reims, in Champagne-Ardenne. You have one from École Centrale de Paris on engineering and process. We have one from AgroParisTech School about white biotech R&D, and we have the one I represent about economic and business science, if you will. So, and we will, all 3 chairs will be seated in Bazancourt-Pomac in the heart of the biorefinery at the end of the year. So we will be very close with our PhD students and researchers to the industries and also research companies, R&D companies. What we are aiming at in this chair is maybe, first of all, a case study, as I said, about this Bazancourt biorefinery. And we are also working now and probably with results end of the next year about what will be the impact of the shale gas economy up to a certain extent on the competitiveness of bio-based product. And as you know, we have to deal with 2 different and parallel communities. The modelers working on agro-food prospect for the future, and a different breed of modelers working on bioenergy and so forth. So it's very difficult to bring those 2 communities together, and this is one of the challenges. Also, of course, the theme himself is of huge importance for investors in the next 15 years. So back to this notion of definition, indicators, database. I think that as you know, new sectors are not covered by national statistical offices, and I have very negative expectations about, under current circumstances, about what national statistical offices will do in the near future, at least for what we know. I just mentioned the French INSEE, Italian Statistic Office, ISTAT, or Census Bureau, or Bureau of Economic Analysis in the USA. When it comes to a new sector, you need a definition of the boundaries of the sector, and then they need to start a process with new questionnaires addressed to the industry or other stakeholders, and they will ask you to pay for it. So I remember last year that the Canadian statistical offices sent us in September a mailing saying we are destroying or cutting 15 of our database. And so they are not just cutting database, they have no money to start new database. So it's supposed to be the job of National Statistical Office to do this over time, if not overnight. And as you know, both Eurostat and then the OECD cannot do anything since the national statistical offices have not done the primary collection of data. So we are in a situation where we both, first of all, lack data, and then we have no comparable database. And I think this means a lot of problem for the bioeconomy at large, or the industrial biotech, if you will, because then you have a kind of lack of trust about the data you are kind of promoting, manipulating, publishing. And if you are investors, analysts, population, you are wondering which kind of data are promoted or are on stage today. So I was just trying, because it's very well known, to cover this issue of differences in definitions. Of course, the bioeconomy project, that we published in 2009 had a very broad definition about the fact that we are interested by all the biotech applications and the progress in engineering. And it's a rather strict definition up to a certain extent. And at least the report was covering 3 of the 4 basic applications, so the red, the green, and the white biotechnologies. In the report, we were not covering a lot about marine biotech. But still, we had a kind of definition of bioeconomy at large as a kind of future prospect for biotechnologies and progress in engineering. Of course, we would be now ready to discuss some kind of maybe looser definition up to a certain extent, because we know that you need some chemical catalyst along the way. And so, but basically, you take the stance that it's driven by science and technology. Okay, so white biotech, of course, apply to biomass to produce food, fuel, molecules, chemical platforms, and so forth, in order to hopefully replace part of the oil barrel economy. But what is not very well discussed in books, reports, and as people promoting the concept, you have a hard time explaining what it is about. And what I mean is that if you think, or we think, that bioeconomy at large, I mean all the 4 or 5 big sectors, could really promote a change of the society as we see with steam, electricity, and digital economy, then you think about a kind of Kondratiev cycle, meaning 50, 60 years, change of the lifestyle of people and the manufacturing process, consumption, with all the problems coming from ethics, governance, and so forth. But it's really difficult to transmit this concept to parliament, government, and even some part of the industry. But this is what is really at stake. One of the reports we published in 1997 was exactly doing such a thing. We were exploring the future of biotechnologies in the next 30, 40 years, and we said, yes, there is a potential for biotechnologies to bring such a kind of immense mutation in the society. But still a question mark, because when, this is the most difficult part. So this morning we had also a very good example of those issues regarding differences. I just mentioned a paper published by Louise Staffas at one of the INRA meeting last year. And even within European countries, you have slightly different definitions, which are also important because is it biological resources? Is it biotechnological processes? To what extent your coverage is very wide or very narrow? And this morning we had some kind of those definitions when people were promoting the 22 million workers in bioeconomy in Europe, and so forth. And then the next speaker, or not the next, but one of the speakers said, and then we have 2,000, what was the figure of Spain this morning? So if you took biotech as a rule, because we don't know how to go down to industrial biotech, and then you can say, yes, I think the figure was 200,000 workers in bioeconomy in Spain. Come on, so it's not something about Spain or Germany or France. Is that since the statistics, existing statistics in Eurostat, OECD, or national statistical offices cannot distinguish which kind of biotech you are talking about, then you can promote any figures that have absolutely nothing with what the industrial biotech could be. So it's confusing. So what is the OECD process? Because I was asked to present what the OECD prospect would be. In the last 60 or 50 years, everything that has been done in, almost everything, I should be careful, that has been done in OECD, this is why I said business as usual process, is you start with a number of member countries. Usually you have champion, 6, 7, 8 countries willing to put effort into a common international definition of anything. And then usually if you know the OECD or go into the site, you will see the roots of the first city where such a group had a meeting. So you have the very famous Canberra group or Frascati group or Oslo group, and then it's becoming an handbook, handbook of science and policy, such and such. So this is a process, and then they try to meet regularly, every 3 months, 6 months or so, and they agree on the core definition. And don't misread me. The notion of a definition is something highly conventional. It's you decide what are the boundaries. Large, narrow, okay. And from this point, if 6 or 7 countries, usually part of the G7, plus a few leading smaller countries, when they agree on a definition, then it's done. Because then national statistical offices will start to collect the data, OECD will start to publish the data, and everyone else will join. No other way than joining something that has been already started by 6, 7, 8 countries. So the question today is we don't have such a group in the OECD right now. Perhaps we don't have such a group in the EC, although that I should mention that what the SCAR was presenting, and they have a subgroup, so they are probably the only one in Europe trying to come up with a kind of conventional definition in Europe. So congratulations for the SCAR, and I think they should continue, because if nobody else is doing it, they will lead the process. Big question is about big data, because you have the idea that let's get rid of the whole process of statistical database. The big data will provide answers. I don't know. I am still from the old generation, so I'd like to see what big data will provide to us regarding what we should know about industrial bioeconomy or something like that. I will not list all the requirements, but another of the meetings that was organized in Brussels was about the first stakeholders roundtable. And of course, investors, Dick Carrez, Hans van Meek, Jan van Esch, you had a list of things that you would like to know, value added, trade flows, a number of spin-off jobs, trade, export, import data, and linkages with production. You see that we would like to have typical question you ask about any of the human activities belonging to the economic part. So the OECD process now that I mentioned, the procedures, is usually when you present any sector, you go from readiness factors to intensity of use to impact. So it's like the life cycle of a product, or it's really following the curve, the usual curve. So what it means is that in readiness factors, usually one of the first things, and as I said earlier, it's not possible for industrial biotech as is that you go to the statistical database about government appropriation and outlays. So it's a technical term, but very easy to understand. It's what the government is putting in terms of science and technology and R&D into the field. You know. And this was the example I took about the Spanish lady, is that, of course, industrial biotech is not detailed, into this classification about NABs, the nomenclature of comparison of scientific program. So the readiness factor would be how much government are putting into the field. Then you would like to have also the same data for the private sector expenditures, which is always more difficult to collect because it's confidential. You have to rely on the industry association data if they can provide it, or you would have to collect by special questionnaires or surveys. So it's a very key issue, and it's very difficult to collect also. But you would like also to know number of researchers, PhD students. You would like to have more knowledge about patents, which is much easier than for the other notion. And also today, you want to know how far the regulatory framework is favorable, and also for biotech, this question of acceptability or social acceptation of a new field. So readiness factor is really, about startups and everything that comes. It's like, R&D, pilot, and demo. You are not at the commercial scale. You are at the precursors of the future sector, if you will. So intensity, activities, and output is, of course, more about business, sales revenue, capacity, production, market shares, and export trade flows, asset investment, and so forth. Service also are much important. Maintenance and insurance are usually a big part of the economy of any sector. And as we said, part of those should be covered by national statistical offices, and if not, by industrial association or analysts elsewhere. And this is also what is missing now for the industrial bio. And then impacts, which is really the assessment, appraisal of what the sector brings or takes, from the rest of the economy or social assets. So, of course, it goes with cost-benefit analysis, customer satisfaction, productivity gains, and so forth, and also cost of deployment as the other part of the balance. You can use life cycle analysis, risk approaches on a number of dimensions, and also net job creation as opposed to just job creations. So of course, a number of methods can be applied. And the difficult part is that this is what the parliament or people will ask you even before you start. They would like to know what will be the net job creation of bioeconomy in the future. So, and this is something that you will know along the road after a number of years. But this is really what you want to see in a kind of report, if it is to be comprehensive about bioeconomy. And also could be detailed by, of course, sub-markets or sub-application, but also with a country profile. So this is something I took no example right now, but to come back to an earlier experience, I was managing in the OECD. It took me 3.5 years about space economy, satellite and so forth, rockets. It took me 3.5 years to get to an international definition of what it is about. There's this notion of a convention, and it was much easier because once NASA, ESA, and the big players are at the table and they agree on a definition, you don't need 20,000 people. You have such a big concentration of power by big agencies that. But even though they are very few, it was a long way to get to the definition, and then from there on, we were able to produce every 3 years a kind of space economy handbook where you see the progress we made on data collection. So this is my hope that someone will take over, and the mere fact that OECD has no budget to either start the process of getting to a common definition or updating the Bioeconomy 2030 report is a sign that the delegates, member countries in the OECD, are not saying this is high priority and this should be funded from right now. So what else? Damien Plan will provide the answers. So the Observatory of the European Commission will do the job. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Schieb. Question and discussion will move after the second presentation that comes from Dr. Plan. Dr. Plan is project manager for the EU Bioeconomy Observatory, a 3-year project to set up the EU Bioeconomy Observatory, which is being established according to the European Strategy for Bioeconomy. Dr. Plan joined the Commission in 2009, and he was in charge also of different projects at the Joint Research Center for Food Safety and coordinating also a large program on MGO. So he has a background as an agronomist engineering, and today he will talk about the strategy and methodology of the EU Bioeconomy Observatory.
Thank you for the introduction, and good evening to everybody. So I will talk about one specific, let's say, project to try to measure the progress of the bioeconomy, the European Bioeconomy Observatory that the European Commission is presently developing. So I will first update you on where we are in the development and implementation of this project, the Bioeconomy Observatory project. And then I will try to highlight some challenges we are facing today. And you will see a lot of similarities between the challenges we are facing with the points that Pierre-Alain already mentioned in his presentation. So let me start with the present status for the European Bioeconomy Observatory project. Like you heard this morning from our commissioner, in 2012, the European Commission adopted a communication on bioeconomy, a bioeconomy strategy, which is structured around 3 pillars. To make it short, the research pillar, the market pillar, and the policy pillar. And in this strategy, you have what you could call a European definition of the bioeconomy. So I just quote what is written in the text of the communication. So basically, the bioeconomy is a production of biomass and the transformation of biomass into value-added products in a broad range of sectors, from food feed to energy use or industrial uses. So in practice, this kind of European definition of bioeconomy includes a broad range of economic sectors, what you could call the biomass production sectors, like agriculture, forestry, or fisheries, what you could call traditional 100% bio-based sector, for instance, the food or the paper production, as well as, let's say, some sectors which you could call the new bioeconomy or hybrid sector. What I call hybrid sector is a sector which can be either be based on fossil resources or bio-based resources, like, for instance, the chemical or the energy industries. So on this basis of this European definition of bioeconomy, we have a specific action in the European strategy, which is the action number 6, which is to set up a bioeconomy observatory that will allow the Commission to monitor the progress and impact of the bioeconomy. So to make it short, you could say that the mission of the Bioeconomy Observatory will be to supply policymakers, first of all, but stakeholders at large also, with reliable reference data and analysis on the bioeconomy. So that's what we started to do, 18 months ago. For those of you who were at the Dublin conference in February 2013, you may remember that the Commissioner, Gagan Quinn, announced at that moment the launch of a 3-year project to set up the Bioeconomy Observatory. So today in Torino, we are exactly halfway in the project, and I'm going to tell you where we are in terms of development of this Bioeconomy Observatory. What I want to say with this slide is that basically we don't have yet a fully operational bioeconomy observatory, but at least since this morning we have a first version of the bioeconomy observatory website online with the first set of data and information collected by the European Bioeconomy Observatory. On this slide, I will try to really summarize the type of activities we are running. 3 types of activities: data collection, once we have collected data analysis, and as well as data dissemination about, the data we collected and the analysis we will run. What appears in green is basically what we have done so far, and in yellow, what we still need to do in the coming 18 months. So basically, if we talk about data collection, so far we have mainly collected existing data. What I mean is that we have taken in various existing databases relevant data for the bioeconomy, and we have centralized them in one central portal or one central database, the Bioeconomy Observatory website. But we are missing a lot of data. Not everything is available in existing databases, so we need to collect more new data. We need to generate actually new data. We started a little bit this exercise. We have run 2 surveys. One is a survey you heard about with the SCAR, the Standing Committee on Agricultural Research, where we collected data and information on national bioeconomy research and national bioeconomy policy. The GRC is also has initiated last month, a bio-based industry survey to try to collect missing data, especially on the bio-based chemicals industry. So once again, once we have data, we will need to run analysis. So on the website, you will see that we have also already some kind of analytical reports, but not enough. And in the future, we will need to develop definitely these data analysis activities in the coming 18 months. And the data dissemination takes place through the website, which is again online since this morning. This slide is just to highlight 3 blue circles which correspond to the 3 pillars I mentioned in the bioeconomy strategy: the research pillar, the policy pillar, and the market pillar. So basically, we will collect both quantitative data and qualitative information on bioeconomy research, on bioeconomy policy, and on bioeconomy markets. To give you a little bit an idea about what you can find on the first version, at least, of the Bioeconomy Observatory website. So if we talk about investments in research, innovation, in skill, what you could call the research pillar, you will find already a first set of statistics for bioeconomy relevant sectors, statistics related to investment, skills, and patents, as well as research programs relevant for bioeconomy. So that corresponds more or less to the first step in the OECD diagram, the readiness statistics. So we are starting with this. It's not a coincidence, it's because that's where the data are more or less available, and I will come back to this later on. For policy, it's mainly qualitative information, so we cannot really talk about statistics. It's basically a bioeconomy policy mapping. We are initiated. We have a quite comprehensive, let's say, library of policy initiatives at EU and member states level. We are developing it for regions, European regions, and in the future also for international partners, meaning non-EU countries. For the market, it's probably the most important part of the activities. So we are still at the beginning of the process. You will look at the website and you will see that there is much more to be done in terms of data collection and data analysis. But basically, we will collect what I would call traditional economic data, be it on production volumes, on employment, on turnover, on various economic sectors corresponding to the bioeconomy. So that's more or less what Pierre-Alain was describing as the intensity statistics from OECD. But once again, we have presently on the website only a first set of data, and there is much more to be done in the coming 18 months. So now I come to maybe to some challenges we are facing when establishing this bioeconomy observatory. But let me start first with a good example coming from one member state, Finland. So some of you may know that in June of June of this year, June 2014, Finland has adopted a Finnish bioeconomy strategy. So it's a booklet which you can find on internet, which you can find also on our website. And in this booklet, you find a table which is really containing a very precise quantification of the size of the bioeconomy in Finland. So I don't know if you can read the numbers on the slide, but basically Finland has estimated that bioeconomy corresponds to a turnover of 60 billion of euros, meaning 16% of the total Finnish bioeconomy. So that looks very nice. It's a very precise quantification of the bioeconomy in Finland. They have also very precise quantitative targets to achieve, to develop this bioeconomy by 2025. So that's good. But when you start looking into the details, again, I don't know if you can read the list of sectors which lead to this number of 60 billion euros. But you see sectors like agriculture, food industry, forestry, wood products. No issue with these sectors. We do have data available in various statistical databases. But then you see sectors like water treatment, bioeconomy services, including nature tourism, which accounts for 3 billion euros in terms of turnover. And then you could start arguing with some people whether these sectors are always included in the quantification of the bioeconomy. You have also a footnote below this table, which says that for some sectors like construction or chemical industry, for instance, the data are actually estimates of the share of bioeconomy-based activities in these sectors. So even when you have a precise list of sectors, for some sectors, like for instance the chemical industry, you don't have very precise data for bio-based chemicals, and you can only estimate presently the share of bio-based sectors. So even with such a good example, we have already some challenges. So coming back now to the challenges I wanted to address, I will talk mainly about 3 categories of challenges related to the definitions, to the sectors, and to the geographies. All of them are actually interlinked. They are not independent one from each other. So for the definitions, so EU definition, I mentioned it before. Basically, there is a biomass focus in the European definition of bioeconomy. So it's a biomass-based economy, if you want to call it like this. OECD, Pierre-Alain already mentioned it, it's more a biotechnology-focused definition. So you have already a kind of conflict between the European and OECD definition. So this is already an example that confirms, obviously, that when you have different definitions, you have already a different scope of monitoring, different boundaries of your activities, which means challenges, to say the least, for data collection, but more importantly, data comparison and data consistency between different geographical levels. So that's for the definitions. Linked to the definitions, of course, you have the sectors you try to include in your definition. So if you have, like Europe, a broad definition of bioeconomy, you have, by definition, again, a broad scope of monitoring, meaning that you need to monitor a broad range of bioeconomy-relevant economic sectors, like the one I mentioned before. If you want to monitor policy initiatives, you need to monitor a broad range of bioeconomy-relevant policy areas. So that means that if you want to do a good job, you need to have the capacity to collect quantitative data and qualitative information, again, on a broad range of sectors, meaning you need to have the appropriate resources to do this. And even if you have a clear list of sectors and capacity to monitor these sectors, not everything is available today. What I mean is that statistics are not available for some sectors. So what I call, for instance, the new bioeconomy sectors, the hybrid sectors, like, for instance, the chemical industry. If you look at the statistics for the chemical industry, you will get a big number, but this big number will, roughly speaking, correspond to 95% of, let's say, fossil-based chemistry and not bio-based chemical industry. So you can only estimate the share of the bio-based chemical industry. For some sectors like biotechnology, and Pierre-Alain already mentioned it, if you look at the existing statistics, for instance, on patents, but on biotechnology in general, they include the whole biotechnology, including the red or pharma biotech, which is big numbers. We don't have specific data for industrial biotechnology. So that's a challenge in terms of data availability. We don't have statistics linking the biomass flows with the end products, whether it's for food, feed, energy, or industrial use. And you mentioned it also in your slides when we try to measure the public sector R&D investment. You can take the G-board as an indicator, but the G-board is available according to broad socio-economic objectives. You don't have a bioeconomy category. So we have tried to collect data, and for instance, we took the broad socio-economic objective, agriculture. So that's fine, we have a number, a G-board for agriculture, but it's not the whole bioeconomy. We tried to ask the question in our survey with a SCAR to the member states, and it's not obvious for the member states to say how much one country is the public sector in one country is investing to support the bioeconomy at a national level. And finally, my third category of challenges is related to the geographies, if you want to say so. So like I said, the Bioeconomy Observatory will collect data primarily for Europe, but Europe, that means the EU, European Union level, that means the national member states, and that means the regional level. So if you have already, was mentioned in the first presentation, different or unclear definitions at national or regional level within Europe, you are facing some challenges to collect data and to compare this data between different geographical levels. Even if you assume this, everybody would follow the same definition, sometimes we don't have statistics available at regional level. So for the regional level, we will definitely face some issues to have a deep analysis of bioeconomy at regional level for the European Bioeconomy Observatory. So I'm not sure I provided a lot of answers, probably more questions than answers to the points you raised in your presentation, Pierre-Alain. I would simply like to finish with a few conclusions. Well, first, the bioeconomy monitoring is still a big challenge, like I tried to explain in my slides. First of all, like for any monitoring activities, we need clear definitions right from the beginning, and I think we all agree on this. Ideally, in a perfect world, we would have statistics specific to the bio-based sectors, like, for instance, bio-based chemicals being produced by the national statistical offices. At this stage, I would say it's more a dream than a reality. It will probably not happen in the short term, and you heard it also from Pierre-Alain. So I'm afraid that the Bioeconomy Observatory will still face some challenges in the coming 18 months to collect missing data. But to finish on a more positive note, I would like to, basically to finish with a double invitation. The first invitation is to go to the Bioeconomy Observatory website, which is available online since this morning. So basically, you can go to the web links which are indicated on this slide. Otherwise, if you Google Bioeconomy Observatory, so in Google by definition, normally the first link which appears is this one. So normally you get on the Bioeconomy Observatory website simply by Googling Bioeconomy Observatory. The second invitation is for tomorrow afternoon. So tomorrow afternoon we are organizing a side event in this facility here in Torino from 3 to 6 p.m. We are organizing what we call a stakeholders roundtable. It will be dedicated to the Bioeconomy Observatory. So I invite you to come back to listen to me and to my colleagues tomorrow afternoon from 3 to 6 p.m. to get more details about the European Bioeconomy Observatory. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Plan. Now we have something about 10 minutes for discussing and addressing questions.
Good evening. My name is Anna Serre. I'm a financial economist. I'm working on European programs. My question is, you talk about agriculture and the creation of biomass, production of biomass, but maybe what we should underpin is the sustainable production of biomass, because this is the big problem. So when you consider the full agriculture production, well, you're considering conventional production, which is not what we want in the future. So this is what we should start considering, maybe what we call agroecological practices. This is what we are trying, personally I'm in a group of work doing this, trying to measure agroecological practices. And this is the first step to convince farmers that this is not only good for citizens and consumers, but it's good for them. And maybe we should do the same thing with processors and trying to distinguish those that are not doing anything concerning, for instance, energy consumption, and those that can be certified, and that because they are doing a good job. So this maybe should be the future. I know this is quite challenging. What do you think about this?
That it's out of scope of my activities, so I will still try to answer your question politely, but no, seriously, sustainable biomass supply and demand is a big question. You may have heard early afternoon some speakers from the bioeconomy panel. Maybe you heard Mrs. Dorette Corbet speaking. She presented a bioeconomy issue paper on biomass supply. I can tell you, because I attend in the meetings where they developed this paper, that as soon as you put the words sustainable together with biomass, you get a lot of animated debates and more questions than answers. So for the Bioeconomy Observatory, which is part of my activities, I will simply say that we collect, or we will try to collect statistical data, first of all, statistics on biomass production, so just numbers, volumes of in tons or in cubic meters. We will try to have a purely statistical, if I may say, approach at the first stage. The sustainable biomass question, which is a very relevant one, we are not yet addressing it, and probably not in the observatory itself. But the question is on the table in other fora, yes.
Okay, I'm Diego Marazza, University of Bologna. I have a very specific question, but probably another tough one. I try to make the same exercise for my region, so to represent the bioeconomy of Emilia-Romagna. And I had a difficulty with the textile industry. We have a production of fiber, but I don't know how to treat the textile, because it's a mixed industry. So it's based both on fiber, bio-based fibers, and petrochemical products. So how do you treat that? Thank you.
If I may answer, it falls in the difficult category of what I call the hybrid sectors. Well, I call them hybrid, meaning which can be either bio-based or fossil-based. So it's like the chemical industry, the construction industry, the textile industry. These are hybrid sectors where it's very difficult to assess the share of bio-based. In in the total statistics that you can get for this sector. So the way we try to address this, because we try still to, even if it's challenging, we try to address this. At this stage, we go to the industry, so to the relevant industry. So I would take maybe the example of the chemical industry. Like I said, we have initiated in the GRC what we call a bio-based industry study. The scope will be focused on bio-based chemical. We will try to go to industry and to collect through a survey very specific data to get the numbers that we cannot get in existing statistical databases. We are also talking to industry, let's say, groups. So there is one group which is called the Renewable Raw Materials Group. The chairman is in the room. Maybe we'll ask a question later or make a comment later. But we have also some European industrial groups who are trying to answer this question. But we don't have, I would say, a magic solution. So I would say going to industry and industry surveys would be the first possible answer.
Yes,
I just had one thing to concur with Damien, is that we want to congratulate you for your efforts, because it's still an incremental process, and since we have almost nothing. So if you could start such a trial exercise or a pilot exercise, but as Damien said, it needs some hard work, because you have to visit all the companies or send a questionnaire, make sure they will answer, and try to build on that. So there is no other way than going to them and asking some figures, if they have them, because sometimes within the company you are creating a new process or a new effort, because they don't maintain such a kind of delineation sometimes. So you need to work, and they need to help you with some dedicated efforts. Sorry.
Yes, Dietrich Wittmeier, chairman of this RRM group. I want to continue what you said. This is exactly our impetus. In our group, there are the European branch federations, and CEFIC, but also sugar industry, IAF, starch industry, Fediol, the oil mill industry, and we've tried to get these numbers, and especially the uses of this raw material. But I will come back to a very interesting question of the UK colleague, the question on sustainability of biomass. We have some indications and a basis. This is the Renewable Energy Directive, who gives clear definitions how sustainability will be defined in environmental, economic, and social aspects. But there is a gap. Nothing of sustainability criteria exists for the industrial use. And this is the point at which we are working. We are just discussing and have ended our work. We took the Renewable Energy Directive and looked to the specific application to the chemical industry, and not only the chemical industry, but also the food industry, the sugar industry, starch industry. And we have now realized the so-called INRO activities, which relies on the Renewable Energy Directive and also is in accordance, and we are working on the CEN standardization, which is very important, because this, if you have the CEN standardization, you have also the sustainability criteria. So the work is going on, and we are preparing a meeting in Brussels. Thank you.
More question?
So hello, I'm Maija Pohjakallio from the Chemical Industry Federation Finland, and I would just like to point out that it's very difficult to, can you hear me? Okay, good. So it's very difficult to gather the data, as you said. For example, even the definition of a chemical sector is different in different countries. For example, in Finland, some of our chemical companies produce fuels or then we include also the pharma sector inside the chemical sector. So then if we compare like data from different countries and sector by sector, it's really difficult. How do you define the industrial sectors in the observatory?
We use the NACE classifications, so the Eurostat. So NACE 20 for 20 for the chemical, whatever 18 I think for paper, or so different divisions in the NACE. NACE is the European statistical classification of economic sectors. So that's the way we. So when we want statistics, but again, we could get the total turnover for chemical industry in whatever the 28 European member states. But what does it tell us about the bio-based chemical turnover? We get a big number, but maybe 98% of this number is fossil-based and not bio-based. So that's. But at least for the definition of the sector, we use the Eurostat economic sectors definition.
Okay, I think we unfortunately have to conclude. I will ask to maybe to highlight a short message. Somehow we understood that the problem is collect reliable data, new way of collecting data for making them available for analysis. So we need to start working regionally.
For the European observatories, the first geographical focus, if you want to call it like this, is first Europe, EU, European Union, and the 28 member states. And already this is, I can tell you, already a bit challenging. If we want really to collect very reliable statistical data, we will not be able to do it for the 300 European regions. So what we do for the regional level, to come back to your point, is that we started with the first set of what we call bioeconomy regions, and through bilateral relations and contacts, we start collecting information for a first set of bioeconomy regions. But for us, I mean, for the Bioeconomy Observatory, the geographical focus is EU, European Union, and the member states first.
Okay. So do you think we must be confident that in 5 years the bioeconomy community will have will provide quantitative evidence of progress and success for the bioeconomy? We heard this morning that the bioeconomy is related to social and economic resilience. So
I will come back in 5 years' time and I will give you the answer.
I can answer.
Yeah, please, your comment.
Yes, as I mentioned a little bit, I think that at one point the industry might consider that it is a self-interest of the industry to do the job, because the cost of opportunity of having no reliable data, no comparison over time is very high for the, let's say, for the industry or services or, you know, research and development, private sector and so forth. So this is maybe one of the options if the big players or smaller players unite and decide that at least they should do something. Because otherwise, you know, I think this is very confusing for investors, for parliament members, for government. And if you are saying, I want a level playing field and I have a lot of data about fossil resources, very open models and so forth, and nothing on bioeconomy, you know, if you are in the position to be a judge or assign or allocate the resources, you will not be very confident in a sector where you don't have reliable data. So I think it's overall an interest. It could be it is a public good, and the tradition was that national statistical offices were doing the job. So today, if they don't do it, you know, it's a kind of stakeholders have to come up front and say we put the resources. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much to the speakers and to the audience, and I invite you to run to the bus who is leaving now to the hotels, and thanks to the speakers again.
Thank you, Lucia.
Thank you. I think that's just the beginning of the discussion.
But you
No,
finished in time for the bus.
Yeah.